Hello everybody, I'm Jeevan Desada. I'm a senior program manager in Azure Active Directory. And today we are going to see how do you integrate ServiceNow with Azure AD. To streamline the IT service management, there are multiple different ways through which you can actually integrate Azure Active Directory and ServiceNow. Let's look at a few particular things at a high level, and then we will see the demo of it. The first thing is single sign-on. You can quickly auto-configure single sign-on and provide a streamlined access to all particular users from your organization into ServiceNow. That provides an easy access to all the users, and they can seamlessly sign in into ServiceNow application. The next option is automatic user provisioning. You need to provision and deprovision users into ServiceNow account because there are a lot of scenarios in organization like joiners, leavers, or movers. That means users actually join the organization, the users leave the organization, or these particular employees move into different departments. And that's where you need to provision these particular users or deprovision users into ServiceNow. Azure Active Directory does offer this particular user provisioning service with ServiceNow. To get the advanced security and protect access to ServiceNow application, you can apply conditional access policies and utilize multi-factor authentication for it. There are different conditions which are available into our conditional access policy engine. You can select these particular different conditions based on your requirement and then decide what access control you would like to provide. For example, you can actually force MFA for administrators in ServiceNow. This is a very common use case. Or you can also say if the user is using this particular application from his home machine or from a different particular laptop or device, then apply multi-factor authentication. So these are some of these particular examples, but you can enable this particular protection and access to ServiceNow and achieve this using conditional access policy. And the last one is you are going to simplify end user experience. When you integrate ServiceNow and other particular applications with Azure Active Directory, all the users will see this particular access panel or all these applications at one particular place. It does not matter. Sometimes these are the SaaS applications, sometimes these are line of business applications. And user can just able to click on the application and can able to do single sign-on. This offers a lot of flexibility for users as they don't have to remember the passwords and all their applications at just fingertip. And they can able to invoke the single sign-on right from this particular access panel. There is also an option called Office Waffle. So if the user logs into the Office particular portal, they can also able to see the similar experience. And from there also they can able to invoke the single sign-on. Now let's look at the one-click single sign-on demo with ServiceNow and how do you configure the single sign-on with Azure Active Directory within just a few minutes. As the first step, let's log in into the Azure portal. To use the Azure portal, you can actually use our short URL, which is ad.portal.azure.com. And that way you can only see the Azure Active Directory related particular menu bar on the left navigation. When I click on Azure Active Directory, these are all the different particular options are available for me. As we now have to add the SaaS application into my tenant, you have to go to Enterprise Application. This is the page from where you can able to manage all your SaaS applications into Azure Active Directory. These are different applications which have already added and configured for single sign-on and user provisioning. Now, let's look at the Azure Active Directory application gallery. When you click on the new application button, it will actually surface the Azure Active Directory app gallery. There is also a new improved app gallery available. So you click on that and now you can able to preview this particular functionality. Along with different cloud platforms, Azure Active Directory also shows different feature applications. You can able to search for any application and add that application from our gallery. All these applications are tested by Microsoft and they are certified so that you can able to use them as an integration. Here you can see ServiceNow option is available. So I'm going to click on that. and I'll provide the name for my particular application as ServiceNow demo. When I click on the create button, the application will get added into my tenant from Azure Active Directory App Gallery. And now you can see that the application got added, and now I can actually enable single sign-on for that particular application. When I click on the single sign-on option over here, there are different options are surfaced for me. The most recommended option is using SAML integration. So I'm going to click on SAML, and I'll actually configure the SAML-based single sign-on with ServiceNow. Now, there are a couple of options you have for configuration. Our configuration guides are already provided for each particular SAML application. So when you click on this particular configuration guide link, it will take you to the page where it talks about how do you integrate Azure Active Directory with ServiceNow. This has a detailed description on the scenario and how do you add the application and how do you configure the application in your tenant. First, you will also need the ServiceNow instance. That means you need to have a ServiceNow particular instance set up, or your developer or the production instance need to be available. Log into that ServiceNow instance using your admin credentials. Right now, I'm using the Orlando version of ServiceNow, and I've logged into my ServiceNow account as an admin. So now you have both these particular portals open, like Azure Active Directory portal and the ServiceNow application. You're logged in with administrator so that we can able to complete the configuration from both the sides. The first step to configure it is in ServiceNow, you need to enable the multi-provider SSO plugin. That means ServiceNow does offer the single sign-on plugin. And to do that, the easiest thing is go to your ITSM guided setup and look for the SAML single sign-on as an option. I've already enabled this plugin, but I'll show you where this option actually resides. Okay, so now you can able to see this is my ServiceNow instance, and here there is a SSO integration option in the connectivity. When I click on this, you can able to see it offers different kind of configuration. I can actually click on the configure and enable, but I have already enabled this plugin, so I do see this particular SSO integration is already available. In your case, you might first have to enable this particular plugin so that the SAML single sign-on can be enabled for your application. Once you have done this particular step, then actually now we can able to configure the single sign-on from Azure Active Directory, but you will need this particular ServiceNow instance URL for that. So let's copy your particular ServiceNow instance URL and go into Azure Active Directory. You can see over here that these are the 3 URLs which are required. So I'm going to click on the edit button and put these particular URLs. The identifier URL is your particular ServiceNow instance. And then there is a reply URL and the sign-on URL. You can able to see all these particular steps have also been actually provided in this particular tutorial. So you can see the reply URL has to be into this particular format. So I'm going to copy the reply URL again, copy paste, and take this particular part, which is now page.2 from here. And I'll also copy the same URL as my sign-on URL. Once you have copied these particular 3 different URLs, you can now be able to save this configuration. There is one more thing which you can do it is the logout URL configuration. You can actually configure the logout URL same as the reply URL for your application, and you can save this configuration. Once you save this configuration, you will be able to see that all these URLs are populated correctly. The second part is about the claim customization. That means there are what type of different claim information is going from Azure Active Directory to your particular app. And here I'm going to choose my default claims, but make sure that your name identifier is mapped correctly, because this is the value which is getting used from Azure Active Directory to ServiceNow integration. You can use, I'm right now using user.userPrincipal name, but you can use it either user.mail, on-premise SAM account name, or your employee ID, or whatever you would like to use it. You can choose those options from here. You can add multiple other claims as needed. ServiceNow does not require any other particular claim, so I'm not going to add it. There is also a group claim option. If you would like to add group claim, you can add it from here. Now, this is the great part of it. We have actually worked with ServiceNow and we are invoking ServiceNow APIs to configure the single sign-on. What it means, that means you do not have to go into ServiceNow and configure your single sign-on. You can just do it directly right from Azure Active Directory. So when you click on view step-by-step instructions in the step number 4, you will be able to see this particular option. Whereas my ServiceNow instance name is automatically populated, and I can put my username, which is in my admin username, and I can put the password for it. Once I have entered my username and admin username and password, I can click on the Configure Now button. This will configure the ServiceNow instance for SAML-based single sign-on and get all the values from Azure Active Directory into ServiceNow for you. So let's click on that button and see what happens. Now you can able to see my configuration is going on, and within a second, the configuration is complete. So let's go and check it out in ServiceNow, what has happened. This particular instruction is also provided into our article. So whenever you are configuring ServiceNow with Azure Active Directory, you can actually follow the automatic configuration as we have suggested. But before you try and test this out integration, make sure that into the multi-provider SSO, the properties are set correctly. So let's go into ServiceNow and check whether they are set correctly or not. Into ServiceNow, there is a filter navigation. Here you can actually type multi-provider SSO and look into the properties. These are the different options which say enable multi-provider SSO yes, enable auto importing, enable debug logging. I have selected all of these 3 options, and I have also selected the user particular field which I need to map it from Azure Active Directory while doing the single sign-on. And by default, it's set as user_name. I'm saving this configuration. Once this particular configuration is saved, now you can actually go into the identity provider section, and you can able to see over there Microsoft Azure Federated Single Sign-On for your organization. Let's click on that and see the entire configuration, how it looks like. You can able to see it is set as default, it is set as active, and the identity provider URL and the authentication URL and every other URL has been set correctly. One important aspect is your name ID policy has to be unspecified. This is also mentioned in our document. When you're looking at our document, it also calls out that you need to make sure that the name ID format or the policy should be set to unspecified. After checking the name ID format as unspecified, you need to make sure that entity ID or a issuer value has to be set correct. Generally, it is set as your particular instance name. This particular value has to match with Azure Active Directory identifier value, and only then the integration is going to work. So make sure that you copy this particular value, go into your Azure Active Directory, and when you edit these particular URLs, this is your particular identifier or issuer value. This URL is same, so I don't see any option to have an update. So it seems my URL is correct. But this is an important parameter when you are configuring the application. Everything else you can able to see is correctly configured over here, but the certificate is not attached. So certificate has been added by actually Azure Active Directory when we invoke it, and soon we will actually also automatically map this particular certificate with your configuration. But for now, I'm clicking on the edit button and selecting the actual my Azure Active Directory X509 certificate, which has been attached over here. I can select that and add it into this particular IDP configuration, and I'm going to save it. Now you can able to see my certificate has been attached and it is set to true, and it has an expiry for next 3 years. Another important aspect when you are testing this particular option is checking this particular single sign-on script. Right now it is set for multi-SSO v2 SAML to custom. This generally works very well, but we will see in our testing how this integration is working. Once we have updated all this particular configuration, you can click on the update button and make sure that the integration is working or not. So let's go to Azure Active Directory. And now we have completed the Azure Active Directory single sign-on configuration. Let's go into users and groups and assign this particular application to few users so that we can test it out. So I click on the add particular button, and this actually brings different users and groups into my organization. Note that selecting different particular groups for your organization is Azure AD Premium functionality. So you need to have Azure AD Premium licenses assigned to the administrator so that he can able to select different groups along with users. So I'm going to select few users, and I'm also going to select my own user for our testing. Now I have assigned these particular 3 different users to my application. Okay, now let's test this integration out, and for that we are going to open the new in private window and see how this particular goes. I'm going to copy the sign-on URL from Azure Active Directory so that I can perform this integration test. I can open the new in private window from here, and then going to open this particular URL. With this, you can able to see this is not auto redirecting to my Azure Active Directory. That means we have not enabled the auto redirection. So let's enable the auto redirection ability into ServiceNow. So click on this particular Microsoft Azure Federated Single Sign-On, and now you can click on this button which says auto redirect IDP. The auto redirect IDP will help the redirection. So that means it will automatically redirect the user to Azure Active Directory for authentication. You can see that I have tested this particular integration. All the tests are complete, and I can able to now close this particular test connection button. To set the auto redirect IDP particular button, you need to click on this particular link which says set as auto redirect IDP. When you click on this button, it will actually save this particular configuration and will check the auto redirect IDP checkbox over here. Now I can update this configuration back. We have set up the auto redirection for our particular IDP. We can go back and again test this particular integration out. So again, I'm going to copy this particular URL from Azure Active Directory over here, and I'm going to open the new in private window. Here I'm going to paste this particular new in private window, and this time you can able to see the user is getting redirected to your Azure Active Directory login page. I can able to type my username over here and then test this particular integration out. I have put my password, and now I click on the no button. I don't want to stay signed in. And you can able to see how this integration goes, and I can able to log in into ServiceNow. So this is it. This is how you can actually able to log in into your ServiceNow instance. There are a couple of more things which I would like to call out over here, that how do we do the user mapping? And that's where I have seen a lot of particular customer struggles. So let's go to Azure Active Directory here, and now I'm into the ServiceNow instance. In ServiceNow, there is an option for users. So when you go into organization users, you can able to find there are different actually users. I'm going to search for my own user over here, and you can able to see my particular user. When I click on my particular user over here, you have to make sure that your email address of your particular user is correctly getting matched with Azure Active Directory, because in the name ID right now I have mapped my user principal name, which is also my email address, which is going to map over here, and the user ID is also going to be same. So this is what the different fields which we have chosen, and this is how the user mapping is happening. If your integration is not working, you will automatically get signed out from ServiceNow. And at that point of time, I suggest you check this particular two fields for user mapping correctly. So you can again go back to Azure Active Directory. And if you would like to change this particular user mapping for your name identifier, then you click on the user attribute claims button, and you can choose this name identifier from Azure Active Directory, and you can change this to user.mail if you need to. Like you can see user.mail as an option. Also, you can see name ID format is been set as email address. That means I'm going to send my email address or a UPN value from Azure Active Directory. So that's why it has to map the same value into ServiceNow. And once these particular mappings are correct, your integration should work. If you see any other particular issue with your integration, I suggest you should be checking your particular identity provider setting by going to multi-provider SSO and identity providers, and click on this particular button and check what particular script you are using. I have seen sometimes customers struggle on single sign-on script, but I have observed that using this particular script always works. So make sure that you can choose this particular script, and that should fix your issue. These are the common particular suggestions which I have for you, but this is how you can quickly able to configure Azure Active Directory and ServiceNow for single sign-on. Once you have configured these particular things, the next step what I recommend over here is to use the user provisioning service. Azure Active Directory also supports user provisioning with ServiceNow, and you can able to set up the user provisioning by clicking on the provisioning tab. That means there will be only one application which actually supports single sign-on and user provisioning for all your particular users. And this is what the ability what you get when you add this particular application from the app gallery. When you click on this Get Started button, you will get this option where you can choose from manual to automatic, and you can just provide your instance name, username, and password to test the connection and then configure the mappings. I'm not going to cover in this particular demo, but please feel free to have a look at this. There is also a documentation available. How do you configure Azure Active Directory with ServiceNow user provisioning? And then once you have done the single sign-on and user provisioning, then you can go and add your application to the right conditional access policy so that you can able to provide more security for your users. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any particular questions or comments, please feel free to let us know, and we'll help you out in that case. Thank you.